Up until that point, most of the support I dealt with had been financial, benefits, money that replaced income I couldn't realistically earn from a job, disability living allowance, housing benefit, later other income support. That side of the system wasn't simple. It meant forms, calls, assessments, reassessments. It was ongoing. You didn't just receive it and forget about it. But over time, I had learned how to operate inside it. I understood the rhythm, what was roughly required. It created a kind of fragile footing. Not comfort, not security, but something you could try to organize life around. It was supposed to stabilize the environment, even if that stability was always slightly shaky. Before going further, I should say something clearly. The point of describing this isn't to complain, it's to show how the structure actually behaves. Most people don't see it up close, and most disabled people don't want to live inside it mentally all the time. I haven't. Over the years, I've stepped away from it when I could, focused on other parts of life. That's necessary. But it's also part of why structural problems persist, because no one can live permanently inside administrative tension, even though the system often behaves as if you should. The next stage was different. Before I continue, a brief introduction. What you're watching is a digital stand-in for Jacko, generated to represent his voice and perspective. This channel explores subjects he finds worth thinking about, including disability, systems, and how people live inside them. This format exists for practical reasons. Jacko lives with a physical disability that makes recording unpredictable and sometimes impossible. Using a digital version of himself allows these ideas to be shared consistently. If you find this kind of thinking useful or interesting, you're welcome to follow along. This next stage wasn't about income, it was about care, actual physical assistance, help with dressing, help with food, help with daily life itself. By the time I came across it, I was already a full-time wheelchair user. This wasn't preventative, it wasn't early support, it was late. For years I'd been compensating within narrowing limits. Even in a wheelchair, independence doesn't mean ease. It means effort, planning, constant adjustment. You hold things together, but only just, and you can feel that long before anyone else sees it. So care wasn't optional, it was the next necessary step. The first time I heard about direct payments, it wasn't through a formal explanation. I found out about it, read about it, heard about it, which partly explains why it took time. Direct payments were described as a way to fund care directly, not income, not rent, but human assistance. Income support is supposed to stabilize your environment. Care support is supposed to stabilize your body inside that environment. That was the theory. On paper, it made sense. The council would allocate funding. You would use that funding to arrange care yourself. That sounded reasonable, even empowering. You could shape how care entered your life. And that matters. Care is intimate. It affects privacy, routine, dignity. What I didn't expect was how difficult it would be just to understand the structure. There were allocations, hourly calculations, separate accounts, contribution assessments, rules about how the money could be used. Each part was explained, but the whole never quite sat clearly in the mind. It felt like you almost understood it, but not completely. And because I had eventually learned how to manage the benefits system, even though that had never been easy, I assumed this would follow the same pattern. Difficult at first, then manageable. So when it didn't feel manageable, when it felt more confusing, less stable, the conclusion wasn't that the structure might be overly complex. The conclusion was quieter, that I hadn't understood it properly. And for years, that's what I believed, that I just hadn't navigated it correctly. And once you believe the mistake is yours, You try to fix yourself. You assume you just need to understand the numbers better, or organize things more carefully, or push a little harder. So I did. I looked closely at what I'd been given, the hours, the hourly rate, and the amount I was expected to contribute toward my own care. Even though my income had already been assessed when I applied for benefits, the council carried out another financial check, another calculation, another decision about what I could afford. So the funding written down wasn't fully available. Part of it was expected back as a contribution. That mattered, because the margin was already thin. Then there was the practical side. Imagine being allocated 10 hours a week at minimum wage. 10 hours sounds reasonable when you say it quickly, but spread across a week, that might mean two 30-minute visits a day. Morning, evening, personal care isn't optional. It's daily. Now ask a practical question. Who can build a stable income out of 30-minute fragments at minimum wage? Who travels across a city for half an hour's pay? Who structures their week around unpredictable, low-margin shifts? It narrows the field. It doesn't attract people looking for stable employment. It attracts people who are themselves operating on unstable ground. People between jobs, people under financial pressure, people whose circumstances are already fragile. And when care depends on people who are themselves unstable, the care becomes unstable, not because they are bad, but because the structure is fragile. If someone's situation changes suddenly, they disappear. If they find something more secure, they leave. If they are surviving week to week, long-term reliability isn't the priority. So you begin assembling care out of whoever is available. Not what is ideal, not what is sustainable, just what exists. On paper, 10 hours are funded. In reality, those 10 hours are stitched together out of precarious lives. And that fragility doesn't show up in the assessment letter. The paperwork says it works. The numbers say it works. But inside the house, the gap is being absorbed quietly. When funding doesn't match reality, the need for care doesn't disappear. The body still needs help. So people adapt. They lower expectations. They accept risk. They make arrangements that don't sit neatly inside the intended model. Not because they want to bend rules, but because the alternative is going without care. And going without care isn't abstract. It's physical. It's daily. It's immediate. There's an uncomfortable truth here. When a system allocates below practical viability, it quietly pushes responsibility for the shortfall onto the person who needs support. The gap doesn't vanish, it moves. And carrying that gap is stressful. Not just logistically, mentally, you are constantly calculating, adjusting, anticipating collapse. At the same time, you feel responsible for holding everything together. If the arrangement depends on flexibility, you feel guilty for questioning it. If you adapt in ways that aren't strictly by the book, you feel exposed. Because from the outside, it appears as though the system has provided what you need. There is no visible failure, so the pressure becomes internal. If something goes wrong, it must be because you handled it badly, not because the structure left no clean path to follow. And once you are operating around a fragile structure, rather than being supported by it, something shifts psychologically. You become cautious, careful, less inclined to challenge the system. Because if the arrangement collapses, you are the one left exposed. So the explanation stays internal. If this feels unstable, I must not be managing it well enough. If carers don't stay, I must not be organizing it properly. If the money doesn't stretch, I must be budgeting badly. Because the paperwork looks legitimate. The approval exists. The figures are official. So the mismatch between what is written down and what is happening in reality becomes something you quietly absorb. And in my case, for a long time, I believed the instability was a reflection of my inadequacy, not a reflection of the structure.